Choose a lane. Either you want to find out the mysterious stuff that your boss is doing, or you stay in your room and keep painting. Choice is yours. Make it and stick to it. That was actually quite funny. Either that, or my brain was just fried at that point from all the nonsense that was happening before. Greetings, fellow floofs. My name, for all intents and purposes here, is Charlotte, and I welcome you to my YouTube channel. The types of books that I read this week kind of very strongly mirrored those from last week. I even had two authors repeated, though I would say that this time around their books were not as great as some of the other ones that I read from them. The other books, though, weren't really in the genre of fantasy or horror or thriller, and more of the lit fic variety, and I would actually say that they were kind of the highlight of the week. So let's get into it. I would like to start with my favorite book of the week, and I would even go so far as to say that it's one of my favorite books this year, and I read like about 60 of them so far, so that is really saying something. The Correspondent is the debut novel of Virginia Evans, and what a debut it was! With this book, she actually became the winner of the Women's Prize in Fiction for 2026, and even though I don't really pay attention to awards like this and always try to judge the book on its own merits, I really love The Correspondent, both for the main character and the really unique writing style. To very, very briefly describe the plot, we sort of follow multiple years in the life of Sybil von Antwerp, a 70-something-year-old woman who is a retired lawyer who lives in Annapolis, Maryland. She has two adult children who live very far from her, a brother who lives even further, somewhere in France, and a couple local friends and friendly neighbors. But the most important thing about her, and the thing that makes this book feel very unique, is that we actually follow her life through the letters that she loves writing to everyone. 4 days a week, for multiple hours, she sits down at her desk with her pen, paper, and some other stationery, and writes replies or first letters to friends, family, people she met throughout her life, favorite authors, and even some famous celebrities. And this is not an exaggeration. The whole book, except for the very short prologue, is provided to us in letter form. It always starts with identifying who the letter is for and their address, then goes on to the greeting and the main text of the message, and then finishes up with the warm wishes and who the sender is. So obviously, over half the letters are from Sybil, but we also get to read a lot of the replies, her correspondence with her best friend, her brother, random strangers that she met throughout her life and who sort of become her friends, and much more. With this book, I also kind of noticed that I have a fondness for books of this lit fic genre that follow fictional stories of fictional characters, but also sometimes include real-life people from history. I had this with The Reformatory, with Set the Dead, and now I guess it's The Correspondent's turn. Sybil writes many letters to famous authors, and she actually even becomes good friends with some of them. We read multiple letters to and from Joan Didion, letters to Kazuo Ishigo and Anne Patchett, who actually has a funny continuity in this video, but we'll get to that. I think I just enjoy knowing that even though this is a fictional story about fictional characters, it still kind of has some anchoring in our reality. As I said, the book follows something like a decade in the life of Sybil, though it doesn't really feel like it, so don't worry. It reads really fast, though because I read it as an ebook, I actually don't know what the print version looks like and how many pages it has, and I sort of hope that every letter starts on a new page, but I also sort of doubt it, because I feel like that would be a lot of empty space. Maybe soon enough I will actually know what the book is like in print form, because I actually did recommend it to my mom. She and I have very different taste in literature. She likes like historical fiction and detective novels and some romance, so almost nothing out of the stuff that I read would be really interesting to her, but so far the only other book that I really recommended to her as just like a nice, kind, everyday deep sort of book, as I would describe it, has really worked out. It was The Wedding People, if anybody wonders. She can really only read books in translation, and so as soon as I saw it at our bookstore, I really pushed for her to get it, and it was a great success. So basically I'm hoping that later in this month, when I go visit my family, there's gonna be multiple trips to the bookstore, and The Correspondent will definitely be on the must-acquire list. This type of book, heavily reliant on letters and correspondence, but also possibly including like historical documents, newspaper articles, or even blog posts, is categorized as an epistolary novel, which is a word that I feel like I hear every couple of years, remember it, forget it, and then have to learn anew in another 3 to 5 years when I suddenly hear it again in some topic of conversation or like reading a material somewhere. No joke, I think I had to learn this word like 3 times by now. With this book, I actually feel like I don't have to explain the plot because there isn't really one event happening. It's just life. It's regular letters to friends, appointments with doctors, correspondence with former colleagues, reconnecting with old acquaintances. It's just all part of life, and you get a pretty complete picture of Sybil as a person, even though she never actually speaks a single word to us. She is very much not perfect. It really seems like she has an easier time to talk and express herself to complete strangers rather than her closest family, but she does grow throughout the book, and more importantly, she comes to terms deals with some events that, even though they happened a long time ago, still haunt her to this day. You'd think that after 70, there wouldn't be much personal growth you would have to go through, but apparently you would be wrong. I loved that Sybil seemed like a complete human to us, with her flaws and issues, yet there hasn't been a single letter where I couldn't tell where she was coming from, even though sometimes she was wrong. By the end of the story, I got the distinct sense that one of the ideas of the book was that Sybil was sort of hiding behind her letters. It's like, if you keep writing about your life, you won't have to live it to the fullest. And so when, because of some events, she is unable to spend as much time writing, she actually starts living more. It's a surprising paradox. So this is my glowing review for one of the best books that I read so far this year. 10 out of 10. I really couldn't put it down. I think the first evening that I was reading it, I stayed up until like 3 a.m. just so that I could read as much of it as possible. Considering I recommended this book to my mom, I really kind of can't imagine somebody not liking it at all. So, great debut novel. I will definitely be on the lookout for the next books from this author. Next up comes The Dutch House by Anne Patchett. Told you there's going to be some continuity in this book list. She was supposedly one of the authors that was corresponding with Sybil von Antwerp from The Correspondent. This book I actually did not choose myself. A couple months ago, my mom joined a book club, like a traditional one where you choose a book, you read it, and then you discuss it next time. And so the book to be discussed at the end of June was The Dutch House. Since I'm always on the lookout for good books, or even just books that I can discuss with somebody, I try to follow their reading list. It really helps me expand my reading horizons. Of course, it doesn't always work out because sometimes the books are just not really available at my library, either because they just don't have them in the collection, or sometimes because the books are so popular that I would have to wait a really long time to get them. But I actually got lucky with The Dutch House. My library collection has a very large selection of Anne Patchett books, and this one was even readily available. It is, however, an audiobook, and I know that some people have different opinions on this. They don't really see listening to audiobooks as having read something, but that's not really how I see it, because I do like to have one or two audiobooks in my reading list, because then I have them available for when I'm traveling or walking around places, or even just doing something tedious at home, like cleaning or video editing. And what was really cool was that the reader was actually Tom Hanks. Yes, that Tom Hanks. He sounded so great, like a kind grandpa, warm, calm, very soothing. That actually really added to the enjoyment of the book. As for the plot, the story is basically taking us through the life of siblings Danny and Maeve Conroy, who were born a couple years apart, with Maeve being the older one. We go from their early childhood to pretty much the very end and learn about the difficult family situations that they had growing up, the character of their father, life with their stepmother and her daughters, family business. Later on, we also go through their years of higher education and building their own families and futures, going through some hardships and just trying to follow their dreams. But throughout it all, it is admirable how close their bond is, how they never waver from one another and support each other and have each other's best interests at heart, more or less. Of course, they are human, and this is a book about real people, so they're not perfect. When I was talking to my mom about the book, she was really surprised at the relationship that the kids had with their father, it being so distant and cold. And I joked that apparently stories where the parents are loving and great are just not that interesting to read. And then I immediately thought about Trest of the Emerald Sea, where apparently her parents were so supportive and understanding that they would mobilize a bunch of their acquaintances to help their daughter escape and go on an adventure to save the guy that she likes. Apparently happy families do exist in literature, the one in the Dutch family just doesn't qualify. Later in life, you really see how a messed up parent-child relationship can impact that child's future choices, especially on the home front. And I don't want to give out any spoilers, but if you have read the book, I really loved the conversation Maeve had with Danny at the end of his first year of med school about a certain ultimatum that he got. It was just so hilarious to me. I actually laughed out loud at it, and while I was listening to it, I was on a train, so I just hope that the people around me didn't think anything too weird. The ending chapter saw the introduction of a character that we have learned some things about previously by word of mouth, but didn't get to meet personally until very late in the game. And I know it was a little bit controversial whether this character even needed to show up, if the resolution to their story arc is going to be not very neat with every single character, but I myself was pretty happy that she appeared. The story starts out pretty slow, and you kind of have to get into the groove of things and adjust to the very slow passing of time, but I would say that after the 50% mark, you will be eagerly awaiting to see where life will take our main characters next. And what about the house? Why exactly is the book named The Dutch House? Well, it has to do with the childhood home in which Danny and Maeve grew up, and it was originally built for a Dutch family from whom the Conroys eventually bought it. The house itself is kind of a separate character in the book, with many descriptions being dedicated to it, and also some plot points occurring basically just because of the house. Even after the house is no longer in their possession, Danny and Maeve develop a tradition of visiting the street, looking at it from afar, remembering things that happened there, and speculating on things that are currently happening there. By the end of the book, the story kind of comes around full circle, and the final pages did bring me to some very emotional tears. I was heavily sobbing. It was not sad, really. It was just very, like, concluded and ended and resolved. The story of the house specifically, okay? Because who cares about the people? I would give the book an 8 out of 10 for me, even though as a book, I can't really say anything negative about it. It's just that for myself, I don't really enjoy these types of stories, like family lives that sometimes follow multiple generations of a family where nothing really major happens and we just follow this slice of life feeling, if you know what I mean. It reminded me a lot of East of Eden. That one also stretched for entire lifetimes of the main characters and was also great work of literature that just didn't really grab me. Then I finally figured out how to transfer books onto my Kobo that do not appear there through syncing, so I had to use my computer transfers and finally read Drive Your Plow Over the Bones of the Dead. It was a book recommendation from a friend, and I'm actually happy that I didn't tell her that I was reading it because I was not as ecstatic about it as she was. This book is a subversive crime mystery novel written by a Polish author and is actually held in pretty high regard, so this is probably just a me issue. The premise itself was very interesting, and the twist at the end was impressive and well executed, but because the story was very slow leading up to it, and it had a lot of ruminations on like topics that were kind of obscure and didn't interest me much, the book just kind of put me to sleep a couple of times. A little bit. Sorry to say. Apparently, the theme of this week of reading was elderly women still have a life, you know? Because we meet the protagonist, Janina, a woman in her 60s living alone in the mountainous region close to the Polish-Czechian border. She doesn't have any family and leads a pretty solitary life. She sometimes chats with her neighbors and has a former student visiting her once a week and has a couple of acquaintances in the small nearby town. She herself also helps out as an English teacher in the local school, but she only teaches kids in the grades like 2 and 3, sometimes 4, basically because she only likes them before they become vicious teenagers. You also don't like vicious teenagers, huh? Janina is described as a very eccentric woman. She refuses to acknowledge other people's names, instead choosing to give them nicknames like Oddball and Good News and Dizzy. She also fervently believes in astrology and on multiple occasions tries to convince other people that when a person was born can directly influence everything in their life, including when and how they will die. And she also loves animals, which you wouldn't think is such an eccentric trait, but because she lives near the woods and there are many, many hunters and poachers around, she often gets into arguments with the local men over their treatment and view of wild and even domesticated animals. The title of the book comes from a poem by William Blake, an author whom Janina and her former student are translating throughout the book. There is this fascination with putting Blake's writing into other works of fiction. I just kept thinking about the show The Mentalist and the connection to Blake's poems in that one. Tiger, tiger, burning bright, in the forest of the night, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? It's not directly connected to this book, but by the end of the story, there is something to be said about human duality and good and evil basically being two sides of the same coin. The events of the book really start when Janina and her neighbor Oddball, as she chooses to call him, discover that their one other neighbor, Big Feet, has died by choking on a bone of a deer that he poached. While looking around his house for his ID, and she really didn't have a reason to do that, she was just snooping and being nosy, not exactly a character trait that I appreciate in people, because she wanted it for his astrological chart, she discovered not only the ID, but also something else that really startled her. What follows is a long story stretched over more than a year, during which we follow the life of Janina and also learn that in the local area, men have started turning up dead, men who are held in very high regard in the local hunter community. Janina actually starts to suspect that it is the animals of the forest that have started to claim their land and their rights and started killing humans who they perceive to be the biggest threats to them. Of course, no one takes her seriously, especially because the letters that she writes to the police where she proclaims this also contain the explanations of the astrological maps of every victim, which apparently corroborate her suspicions that animals are actually responsible for these kills. Bonkers. I get that the story rails against her opinion not being respected because she's an old woman. No one defers to her as an authority figure of any kind, and the people in local power, like the police, the priest, local businessmen, they only see her as a crazy old biddy. But I kind of felt that it was no wonder considering how often her arguments were presented as fantastical and supernatural. I mean, yeah, cynicism should be looked down upon, I agree, but logical and practical thinking cannot be completely ignored either. Over the course of the story, I was growing more and more frustrated with the main character. I sort of started to suspect either a serious mental condition or some other type of problem like that, because her insistence on these astrological signs and influences and her determined statements that it must be the animals who are responsible for these crimes were just kind of really getting on my nerves. And when at the end of the story the twist came, I, on one hand, was really vindicated, but also on the other, I was feeling even more confused about the themes of the book and the message. While the main character does present her stance on animal rights very clearly, and by the end of the story we do understand the reasoning behind everything that happens, I can't really see how the events of the book could be considered a good form of resolving problems or changing the system or whatever it is that would be a good message to take from all of this. Two wrongs don't really make a right, and so the book just kind of left a bad taste in my mouth. Going full on anarchist cannot be what the author is advocating for, and so if the intention was for everybody to read the book, think deeply about their actions, and repent, then I think I have some unfortunate news. I also noticed something that was kind of iffy to me. I don't know if this was the intention of the author, I sort of doubt it. Early on in the book, Janina states her aversion to traditional names, but she also confesses that she was never able to come up with a nickname for herself. She names a couple of names that would be interesting to her, but they are also non-descriptive ones, not like oddball or big feet. What that tells me is that Janina is kind of a very judgmental person. She formulates an opinion from any little occurrence or trait that she notices and then just sticks to it, not allowing for people to change in her eyes. I'm not sure if this was something planned by the author or if this was just supposed to be one of Janina's quirks to help bridge the divide between human, animal, and other living beings, but it didn't really help me empathize with her character. It just kind of seemed like she sees herself as the only real person around, somebody who can't be summarized in a word or phrase, and most others around her are just characters. It's also interesting that she enters a brief relationship with one of the few characters that actually have a name instead of a nickname. Just a curious thing to think about after finishing the book. In the end, my personal score for this book has to be a 6 out of 10, and it kind of hurts to say that because I do believe that the book is deeper than what I was able to discern, but it just really didn't do anything for me. It was kind of a slog to get through. Even though I understood the actions of the main character, I could not agree with her, and all the mentions of Mars being in retrograde just kind of really wore me out by the end. It is an interesting work of fiction, that is for sure, and I think my enjoyment of it was kind of also hindered by the fact that I was sort of hoping for some fantastical murderous animals. That would have been my type of twist. But alas, there was no fantasy in this, and so we must move on to the next book. And the next book has all the fantasy. So much fantasy, in fact, that it covers an unending amount of galaxies. So we are in another world of Sanderson's creations with the book The Frugal Wizard's Handbook for Surviving Medieval England. It really is surprising how close all of these Secret Series books have been for me. This one, Tress, Isles of the Emberdark. There sadly are not that many more left at my library, so I might have to look for some other fun fantasy to read. Maybe I'll move on to Terry Pratchett. He did leave a huge legacy in the Discworld. So this book's title is kind of reminiscent of The Hitchhiker's Guide Through the Galaxy, though the premise is quite different. We start the story by meeting our protagonist, who can't even remember his own name. He wakes up in a field with amnesia, wearing a weird combo of like regular clothes, and above them he has something that looks like a medieval robe, and around him there are a bunch of pages from a torn up and burnt book. Who is he? Where is he? He basically has this type of amnesia where he forgets all the personal information about himself, his past, his relationships, but he still has the perfect memory of general things like the world and history and language and stuff like that. So he quickly realizes that he's in a sort of medieval England setup, something like a Renaissance fair, but of course from the title of the book we know that nothing is that simple. After he reads a couple pages from the torn up book, he kind of gets some answers. Spoiler alert, he is in medieval England. Who could have predicted that? But the thing is, this isn't the regular England that we have learned about. The title of the book that we are reading is also the title of the book that John, that's his name, had on him, and it is distributed by a company called The Frugal Wizard. They specialize in selling dimensional retreats. The way they explain it, modern technology allows you to travel to alternate dimensions as a tourist, and the company bought up a spectrum of these dimensions where the time is medieval England between like the 6th and 14th century. So now they can sell these dimensions for other people to inhabit. Basically, if you want to live in simpler times and maybe help other people slowly develop modern technologies, or maybe you want to conquer a continent, enslave nations, and become a ruler of an empire, you can buy this dimension and explore all the possibilities to your heart's content. Sounds great, doesn't it? You didn't just buy a dimension, you bought all the people in that dimension too, and they didn't even know that it happened. Yay! Well, now our protagonist finally has at least some understanding of what's going on, so he's happy about that, and then the plot breaks through the door. So far, he has met a couple of the locals, and they seemed like decent people, and then he sees somebody from his own timeline. Somebody who does not like him very much, and who is objectively a terrible human being. This terrible human being then proceeds to shoot and kill somebody, and then take another local as a hostage. After they leave, a rescue mission is organized, with John joining the sister of the captured guy and the leader of the local settlement. So this is the start of the adventure. John is of course not really taken seriously because nobody knows him, and also the way he was behaving with the memory loss was kind of sus, but he decides to use the limited modifications that he has, because obviously in the future everybody can have enhancements to their body, and so he decides to use it to convince his companions that he is a wizard. That's what the dimensional travel manual suggested that you should do. Tell the technologically challenged people from the past that you are a wizard. Sadly, these people don't really know what the wizard is supposed to be, but they just kind of go along with it. As the adventures go on, our group establishes bonds of friendship, and John learns that this dimension is actually kind of special because it not only has magic, but also presumably gods, which is something that's pretty unheard of. In the end, all the villains are defeated or chased out, and a happy ending comes for all who deserve it. This book I probably enjoyed a little bit less than the other Secret Series books that I have read so far, like Tress and Isles of the Emberdark. I can't really put my finger on it. For some reason, it didn't connect with me as much as the other ones did. Maybe it's just because the main character was kind of a little bit less charismatic and sure of who he was, you know? Of course, it starts off with memory loss, so you can't really blame him for doubting himself at every turn. But then when he starts to regain some of his memories, he becomes even more unsure of who he is. When he didn't remember anything, he could kind of try and mold himself into a hero, pretend that this is who he was and always wanted to be. But once he remembers, he for sure knows all the mistakes that he's made and all the disappointing turns that his life took. And of course, your main character should have some flaws. It does make them more relatable, but I guess this one maybe just didn't land with me as well as the other ones did. There were just too many doubting moments, a little bit too much despair for my taste, I'd say. Though at least that gave him something to overcome. I guess because of this, my score for the book would have to be 9 out of 10. It was a little bit not perfect, but still a very fun ride. The magic system was really interesting, and there was this scene with butter and shoes, if you know, you know, that I just kept coming back to because it was kind of really funny to imagine. And the constant inserts of the pages from the handbook that John brought with him just made the book even funnier, especially the parts from the Q&A. I saw that this one has actually already been translated and should be released sometime in the middle of July. Hopefully it will be on my shelf sometime soon. And we finish up this week's book reviews with Wolfworm by T. Kingfisher. This might actually be one of my last T. Kingfisher books for a while, because I actually don't have any other books of hers in my holds, and so we will have to see when next I'll be able to find something from her. So the beginning of this book is strangely reminiscent of Snake Eater. Our main heroine arrives in a remote town somewhere in the south with nowhere else to go, and at least in the case of this book, with a purpose. She has been hired as an illustrator for an entomologist. Sonia, our main heroine, lives at the end of the 19th century, so for a woman it is a little bit difficult to find a job and make a living. So she's very happy that she has been chosen by Dr. Halder to make illustrations of different bugs for a book that he's planning to publish. The doctor is quite the pest himself. He's rude, demanding, unceremonious, as you might say, quick to anger and impatient, but at least he's not a bigot or cheap, so there's that. Sonia also meets the other 3 people that he employs that cook, clean, and tend to the garden, and she gets to live in a beautiful room that's connected to a studio where she can do her drawings. But even though it is obvious that somebody previously lived in those rooms, nobody is actually very eager to talk about that person. And this is where I kind of lose my connection to the main character. First, she's described as very meek and frightened, worried that she's gonna get fired and kicked out with nowhere else to go. So you just kind of expect for her to keep her head down, do her job, and leave everyone else alone. But I guess it's just human nature to be curious, so she starts asking around. Fine, I can live with that. But when she notices something even slightly weird, she kind of becomes obsessed with it, and even though she knows that she's for sure gonna get fired if she's found out, she just can't stop going at it. It becomes this dissonance between the character and her actions because she really didn't seem like a person who would snoop around other people's business without a good reason for it. But okay, sure, do it. Find out everything you can, even though it's none of your business. But then when she does, she just refuses to believe it. And sure, she encounters something supernatural, something that's hard to believe. But she keeps making these comments in her head, like, I'm a scientist, a logical person, I have to be vigilant and curious. But then when the situation presents itself, where she kind of has to breathe deep and look and actually take in and accept what's happening, she just kind of closes her eyes and says, nope, and runs away. It bugged me so much, excuse the pun. She just full on refused to believe what she saw with her own eyes. The ending was already not very tense, and you already knew that she and all the other good guys are gonna be fine in the end. So her basically dragging out the story by full on rejecting the reality of what she saw or was even seeing at this very moment was just really infuriating. And not to sound weird, but I kind of thought that in the olden days, I mean, we are talking about like the 1880s now, it would have been not such a big stretch for people to believe in something supernatural. You kind of have to keep your mind open, I guess, and she just really refused to. Even after she believed some things, she still kind of refused to believe other stuff. It just really didn't fit into her head. And because of this, the author can't let you accept the information gradually. You can't kind of come to conclusions organically by yourself. She really just had to insert a full page where she spells it out for you, word by word, exactly what happened, because previously the main character just full-on refused to engage with the knowledge that was given to her. It was bizarre. As I said in a previous video about Nettle and Bone, in T. Kingfisher books, there often are protagonists that kind of just refuse to accept that anything supernatural is happening to them, but I would say the worst example so far is still What Feasts at Night. Hated that one. Maybe they are sharing the first spot for me. So yeah, that would be my big criticism of the book. I can live with obviously shifty characters, with self-doubting and timid protagonists, and a bunch of terrifying bug descriptions, but I draw the line at my main heroine just full-on refusing what she sees right in front of her eyes, and actually saying stuff like, some voice in my mind tells me to look over there, see what that is, and I'm like, nope, I'm not going over there, I'm gonna stay right here and close my eyes and I will be fine. Well then maybe next time don't stick your nose into stuff where it doesn't belong. Choose a lane. Either you want to find out the mysterious stuff that your boss is doing, or you stay in your room and keep painting. Choice is yours. Make it and stick to it. Okay, I get heated just thinking about it. 6 out of 10. The premise was interesting, the bugs were very creepy, and the side characters were engaging, but the main heroine just annoyed the hell out of me, and so I can't give it a higher score. It will not be a deal breaker for other people, but it definitely was for me. So yeah, 6 out of 10. So with the book reviews done, let's move to the movie review. Okay, now that I have calmed down and am definitely not angry anymore about Wolfworm, it is time to get really angry about something else. Last week I saw Disclosure Day, and I have to say, I didn't really have high expectations for it. I was ready for a big budget action fest with little substance, and even that turned out to be too high a bar. It kind of reminded me of Megalopolis in that regard, a movie so disappointing, I actually stopped going to the cinema for a few months after that. It just kind of broke something in my brain. These two movies actually have another thing in common. Both were made by very famous directors, Steven Spielberg and Francis Ford Coppola, and I have seen both times the discourse whether the positive aspects of the movies that people were naming were basically invented because of the love and admiration for these big names in the industry. I know some people say that they don't believe that that is the case, that the movies were not that bad, but I think that the only things that really saved Disclosure Day from being a complete disaster are the relatively high budget that allowed for some interesting cinematography, the respect that people feel for Steven Spielberg, and Emily Blunt's performance. She really brought her A game. I'm so happy she got the chance to flex her acting chops, especially after The Devil Wears Prada 2 earlier this year. Sadly, in the case of Megalopolis, nothing could save that disaster, and what really didn't help was the god-awful dialogue that Adam Driver had to recite. That movie just lives in my mind like a sleep paralysis demon, coming forth from time to time to paralyze me all over again with quiet shock over how stupid it was. Kind of like Nikki from The Obsession. Just a lot less creepy, mainly just insane. Back to the topic at hand. Disclosure Day describes itself as a movie with aliens, although I have to say, the aliens truly didn't do much. It's mainly a movie about a bunch of people that know about aliens, and then half of them want to make this knowledge public, and the other half want to keep it secret at all cost. And yet the movie sort of feels like it has no stakes. I mean, with a title like that, you already kind of know what the end game's gonna be, and so I feel like the only way to make it impactful would be to make us either really care about these characters, or to make us really invested in the information coming out as a way to change the world for the better. And I would argue that neither of these options was achieved, because we had characters that just kind of moved around from place to place, doing stuff that didn't really matter, and then the final resolution was so open-ended that truly anything could have happened after the final shot of the movie faded out from the screen. Okay, now that I have gotten at least some of the frustrations off my chest, allow me to give you an overview of the plot and everything that's happening, including all of my gripes with what is happening. Obviously, there will be a lot of spoilers, so if you heard me and everybody else complain about the movie but you still feel like you want to watch it for yourself, this would be where you jump off. Otherwise, let's get into it. we open on a really weird choice, a brutal fight in an arena, and before you get to think what exactly is the point of this, we see that the important characters aren't actually the ones fighting, but are the ones spectating, and they are about to exchange something important and possibly illegal. Why did it have to happen at a match? Only a higher power, meaning Spielberg, will probably know that. Because they soon move outside, there's some threatening, some blackmail, and then through a series of very bizarre choices, two people, a guy and his girlfriend, manage to escape with a car, a laptop, a bunch of memory sticks, and a weird handheld device that everybody seems terrified of. So, after this scene and some context from future explanations, this is what happened. Daniel worked for a company that is loosely connected to the US government called Vortex that has over the years been compiling a lot of information on extraterrestrial activities on Earth, of which there were apparently crazy many. The aliens have supposedly incredible technologies, although I would like to point out that they cannot be that incredible because otherwise, why exactly do they keep crashing their spacecrafts? Almost every video we see of them is of a crash site. Either build better ships or stop coming to this hostile place. Come on, make a choice and stick with it. Well, inside the corporation, there's this small group of people who have apparently been working for years to make this knowledge public. What exactly have they been doing? Your guess is as good as mine, because it kind of feels like they have achieved nothing, and only now the plot kicks into high gear because Daniel has stolen a bunch of these memory sticks with the secret footage, and also the fancy alien device. The company also apparently easily tracked him down, and like any smart gangster, they used his girlfriend as leverage, but as the true idiots that they are, they didn't count on him, like, not actually wanting to give over the stuff. And so somehow, emphasis on somehow, he manages to escape with his girlfriend and all the stolen stuff. The more I think about that scene, the more nonsensical it is. He has no special skills, no training, and they all know that he has this dangerous device, and yet they still set it up in a way that he can actually easily escape with the hostage and all the things that he stole. Lesson number 1. Don't bring your hostage to the exchange. Bring them later, when you already have the item. And truly, I mean, nothing is actually stopping them from just shooting him. I don't know. Nothing made sense here. Just very disappointed in these government goons. I expected better from them. So Daniel and his girlfriend Jane escape, and they don't really have anywhere to go, so she suggests they go to the convent where she has actually lived for a couple of years. There she's welcomed with open arms, and Daniel is allowed to stay for the night until he waits for a guy from the resistance, that's what I'm gonna call them from now on, to arrange to take him to a safe house. Why go there? What will happen next? What's the plan? He doesn't know, and neither do we. And I think not even Spielberg is completely sure what to do if other events don't line up perfectly out of nowhere. But alas. Daniel tries to leave his girlfriend at the convent for her own safety, which is a smart choice, so of course it doesn't work out, she refuses to stay, and she doesn't even really have a good reason for why she wants to come with him. It just feels like she's being nosy and just wants to know what's gonna happen next. There were actually a couple really funny scenes afterwards. I mean, they weren't trying to be funny, they were trying to be very serious, but I would say it didn't really work out. Basically, Daniel says, I can't explain everything to you right now, it's too complicated. So Jane says, okay, I understand that. And then when they get into the car to go to the safe house, she gets in and says like, okay, I will go with you, and you don't have to explain everything to me right now, but there will come a point in time where I will ask you, and you will tell me everything. And you're thinking like, okay, well, I guess it makes sense. They don't have time to talk about it. This is the mission. She wants to participate, so let her come along. All right. But then literally the next scene, they arrive at the safe house, and Jane's like, okay, now you will tell me everything. I mean, what was the point of being so dramatic about it if the info dump is just gonna happen in the next 3 minutes? Literally the next scene with them. It just made no sense. No words. I have no words. Just laughter. I really just laughed in the theater. But because Daniel apparently thinks that somehow this ultimatum is binding to him, and obviously because we need to know this information and there's apparently no smarter way for us to find it out, he decides to actually explain everything to Jane, and so he shows her the alien footage that he stole from the government on the memory sticks, and those clips include the US government doing experiments on the aliens, apparently without anesthesia. It is properly gruesome, at least the audio is. We don't really see any visuals. After this, he decides that he needs to get some air and goes outside. It is at this point that I would like to mention that the actress that plays Jane, I have actually seen in the Netflix show Behind Her Eyes, and this is not necessarily something that I would mention out of nowhere, but I just say it because apparently from now on the actress will be associated in my mind with possession, because boy oh boy do people love possessing her. So while Daniel is conveniently gone, the head guy of Vortex that we met before finally stops waiting around for the stolen stuff to just kind of magically come home and decides to do something about it. And this something is apparently using the alien technology that they have to sort of possess the mind of Jane. He appears in front of her in the house, but he's also sort of in control of her body. The process of possession is called diving, and apparently Scanlan cannot dive Daniel for whatever reason. And so I guess he got really lucky that Jane just refused to stay with the nuns, otherwise the plot wouldn't work. Imagine the horror. While all of this is happening, not too far away in Kansas, we meet the other main character of the movie. Margaret Fairchild, I just like to say her full name and sounds kind of magical, is a weather girl on a local channel, and she's not very satisfied with her life. She has a living boyfriend, is one of those guys that would bring his guitar to a party and then kind of act shy about playing it and then just never stop humble bragging about how great he is. We meet both of them during this bizarre scene where at the morning table when they're having breakfast, through the window a red cardinal bird flies in, sits down at the table, and looks Margaret dead in the eyes. I feel unexpected for the bird to start talking, but instead there's just like a gust of air and then the bird flies away. After that weirdness, Margaret accidentally and very unprompted starts speaking Russian, and like she's saying phrases that are normal and stuff that she would be saying to her boyfriend otherwise, but it's in Russian. And I would like to ask, why? We see later that every time she gets in touch with these like psychic abilities that she now has, they come out because either she wants to communicate with somebody who doesn't speak English, or she wants to help soothe somebody with some information, but it is always connected to something else. But the Russian in this scene is completely out of context. It's also kind of terrible, so it's not like Emily Blunt wanted to show off her Russian speaking skills for this role. So I'm thinking that it would have made so much more sense if, like, for example, the bird is flying away, the boyfriend accidentally knocks over a TV remote, and the TV starts on a channel where they speak Spanish. They turn off the TV, but then when Margaret starts speaking, she is speaking Spanish. Still for no reason, but at least it's connected to something. Finally, Margaret goes to work, behaves again very weirdly with people, and then she goes live on the air and starts making these creepy, clicky, throaty sounds that promptly land her in the hospital with suspicion of a brain tumor. While there, her psychic abilities flare up again, and she realizes that the men in black suits that are watching her are not actually FBI, but something a lot more sinister, and so she convinces her boyfriend that they need to make a break for it. Why no one was closely watching her and not allowing her to escape, I don't know, but I guess we already established that the guys from Vortex are just not very good at their job. So Margaret and her boyfriend get to the car, start driving, and suddenly she gets a phone call from the head guy of the Resistance, who's like, "Trust your instincts, follow them and meet me." Nothing makes sense. Don't try to find logic here. It all just happens because it has to happen for the plot to progress. That's just the kind of story that we're in. Or maybe he's just God, masquerading as a human and driving everybody's choices. I mean, at this point, I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. Next, we get a scene that I think was added to add some levity and fun to the situation. But honestly, if you think about it for longer than half a second, you realize how stupid it is, and you will just forever be stuck rolling your eyes. So, okay. God guy on the phone tells her, you have to destroy your phone so they can't track you. So she jumps out of the car. Mind you, they're like 5 meters away from the entrance to the hospital. So she chucks the phone on the ground, tells her boyfriend to drive over it. He tries, misses twice, and then she finally puts the phone right in front of a wheel and he drives over it and it cracks, and she's so very happy. And now the $1,000,000 question. Why did you even have to do that? Okay, first of all, you can just leave it on the ground. You don't have to destroy it. If you leave it at the hospital, they can't track you. And then second of all, you do realize that your boyfriend still has a phone, right? And what about the car? You're not spies. It's not a stolen car. They can track your car even more easily than the phone. They know who you are. Come on, use your brain. That scene is so long and they think they're being so funny and clever when they're doing it. If it had just been a couple of seconds, my brain wouldn't even have time to come up with this complaint, so it would have been just accepted. But because they dragged it out so much, you just sit there and stew. Nevertheless, the agency guys are idiots, as we have already established, so they have no idea how to find her. And we have no idea why they even want to find her, so it all works out perfectly. Yay. And because now she possesses the ability to make plot points happen as she wishes, a very useful ability, I might add, very useful for the director as well, she apparently gets this magical feeling again, and then magically guesses Daniel's phone number and calls him. Somehow she just feels that she needs to meet him, and also she magically knows where to go, and also she magically knows that Scanlan has managed to get information out of Jane about where they are at the safe house, and so she tells him that there are a bunch of black cars now on their way to the tiny farmhouse in the middle of nowhere where they are staying. So the call is to give him a warning. And I don't even want to get into the fact that currently he's standing in the middle of a field, a not very tall field of wheat. And so you would think that the 50,000 agents that are currently swarming around would definitely see him, but instead he manages to steal one of their cars, drive into the house, grab Jane, all of their stuff, and actually drive away before they are captured. Insanity. Just insanity. With the help of a higher power, and by that I mean Spielberg, they manage to escape and then hide out at a motel. Because Daniel now knows that Jane was possessed by Scanlan, he ties her to the bed and removes all the identifying stuff from around the room. But of course he doesn't cover her eyes, and so when Scanlan possesses her in the night, he sees the piece of paper that Daniel is holding that had the name of the motel. So of course he knows where they are. At this point, I was just so exasperated with all the contrivances that were happening that nothing seemed implausible anymore. If at the point they were surrounded, sentient rocks started to fall out of the sky, a la Rocky from Project Hail Mary, I wouldn't even be surprised anymore. Well, they do get surrounded, and Daniel makes the incredibly stupid decision to make Jane take the alien device and run out the back. Run out the back? What do you mean? They are surrounded. Nope. Don't think about it. Don't worry. She just hides behind a tree and nobody sees her. Also, wait, Jane takes the most important alien device? Jane, who has previously been dived on twice before? Yeah, don't think about it. They sure got lucky that after Wardeck's guys don't find the very important alien device in the hotel room, and they also don't find the girlfriend. Nobody tries to dive Jane again to find out if maybe she has the stuff. Just so lucky. I feel totally wrung out. Next comes a rescue mission where Margaret uses her incredibly overpowered psychic abilities to just basically drive onto a military base, rescue Daniel like 5 minutes after he has been captured, and just drives away with him. One guy, just one guy from the corporation tries to follow them, and we get a sometimes cool looking and sometimes just very insane train climbing scene that at least ends with some really great acting from Emily Blunt. I already mentioned this, but I think that her acting was really one of the highlights of the movie, along with a couple of other cool shots and some interesting color grading at times. She really brought so much emotion and passion into the role. I really commend her for taking it seriously, even though at this point the plot just resembles Swiss cheese. Okay, I can do this. Daniel and Margaret, finally united, go to find the Resistance, which of course is in the city of Kansas, the most important city in the US, it seems. There they finally meet God Guy Hugo and some other people from the Resistance, with whom Margaret promptly starts behaving very weird. She does this Jesus-like walk. She walks up to everybody and guesses their names with her eyes wide open. But then when one woman falls to her knees, she's like, "I will not be anyone's religion." Girl, maybe then just try to act normal? I don't know. Pick a lane, damn it. This is the motto of the week, apparently. Pick a lane and stick to it. Here we learn the master project that the Resistance has been working on for years, and it's so much weirder than anything you could have imagined. Supposedly, and the supposedly is the size of a suburban house. For years now, the organization has suspected that along with Daniel, the very special Daniel, who they discovered 8 years ago because of his crazy math skills, they have suspected that Margaret is the other magical person. How they reached this conclusion, nobody knows. But on this suspicion, they decided to recreate her childhood home completely, down to the last crayon and butterfly sticker. True insanity, just head empty. Look at the pretty colors. This was apparently all done to trigger her memories from this one night when she was 10 years old, when apparently aliens lured her out of the house into the woods, presumably, and then onto an alien spaceship where they apparently gave her these special powers. And of course, now we know that apparently Daniel was also there, and that's why the two of them are the special people with these special powers. Story time. I enjoy to watch K-dramas. Don't judge, there are some really good ones out there. But a very popular and somewhat annoying trope that often comes up is called the childhood connection. This is basically when two of your main leads, who inevitably enter a romantic relationship when they're adults, realize that when they were kids, they actually had some sort of meeting or fateful encounter. So this could be they were playground buddies when they were 7, or they briefly were neighbors, or they were kidnapped together. You know, that sort of stuff. Regular things. But this movie takes the cake. Even though they don't actually enter a romantic relationship, getting experimented on by aliens is the craziest version of the childhood connection trope that I could have ever imagined. Hats off to you, Spielberg. I think you are now ready to write a story about a chaebol who falls in love with an alien, because I do think you have the talent for it. With their memories restored, for all the good that it does them, the Resistance finally decides that it's time to reveal the information about aliens to the world. Why now? Well, because the agents are closing in, and so there's nothing else for them to do, and we finally get one fun scene where Margaret manages to make everybody invisible, including the house, and so we see agents start running towards the dots on the heat sensor that are supposed to represent people, and start slamming into doors, breaking through windows, falling over couches. That was actually quite funny. Either that, or my brain was just fried at that point from all the nonsense that was happening before. So they all escape and drive to the only other place that we have seen in this movie so far, the news station building. They set up all their sources, and Margaret does some mind control to make them let her go on air live. And then when everybody is in position, the agency guys cut the power, and then also the backup power. At that moment, Jane shows up with the device, and she gives it to Margaret, and because the device is so overpowered that it probably could make live unicorns show up out of thin air, she just uses it to restore the power so that they can do the live broadcast. The most, like, I'm done with this movie scene happens when a bunch of agency guys, including Scanlan, run into the broadcasting station, and you can see that they are fully capable of interrupting anything that's happening, but for some reason that I couldn't figure out, Scanlan just kind of falls into a chair and waves his hand like, to hell with this. I'm too old to be dealing with this. It really didn't feel like he had changed his mind about anything. It just felt like he was Tom, who's just too tired to be chasing Jerry anymore. Then the broadcast starts, and for all of Margaret's desire to be a news anchor, she literally gets to say like one sentence, and then they just cut to the footage. And then comes a very full and long montage of like people on the street stopping and staring at their phones, other broadcasting stations picking up the stream and showing it on their own channels, and other news anchors reacting to the footage live. It is obvious that they wanted the scene to feel very impactful, like the world is learning something incredible, but the scene itself felt kind of very trite, very soapy, and too optimistic. Like, you just know that a bunch of people are gonna dismiss this as a hoax, Photoshop, definitely AI, or just find a different reason for why this either doesn't matter or can actually be used nefariously. A shout out goes to the real life anchorwoman from NBC who provided most of the live reactions to the footage, Courtney Grace. Her acting was great. She was so emotional and stunned, really was the brightest spot in this whole montage. To finish out the story, Hugo the resistance leader brings out the only proof that they actually have been doing anything in the last couple of years, a real life alien that they stole from the Vortex Corporation. Now we just have to hope that humanity doesn't write this off as AI generated and actually believes in aliens. The end. Okay, this was quite a ride. Aside from all the nonsense that was happening, the movie did try to, somewhat ham-fistedly, drive across a couple of themes and messages. I would say the most obvious one would be the call for transparency, with that being basically the goal of this whole misguided plot. And then the others, I would say, revolve around a religion and its influence over people, and establishing empathy as the driving force for connection. The religious aspect of this was mainly covered by Jane and the nuns. Once she learns about the existence of aliens and the plan to reveal them to the world, she is actually unsure if this is such a good idea. Because she is religious, she sees some harm in this. She says, what if people turn away from God and start worshipping these aliens instead? I'm not religious, so I can't really weigh in on this discussion, other than to maybe say that, in my opinion, it kind of felt like a shallow interpretation of religious beliefs and faith, but apparently Jane's doubts could be easily resolved by a 3-minute conversation with a nun, where the nun basically says, yeah, don't worry, the Bible actually doesn't have anything against alien life. Problem solved, I guess. The empathy one sounded nice in theory, but it just truly felt so naive. It's like that montage. We see countless people standing in the middle of the street, looking unblinkingly at their phones, taking in this new information. First of all, I don't really see that as a good thing. It looked kind of creepy, looked as if they were all hypnotized by their phones. And secondly, isn't that just really way too simple of an assumption to make about what people would be thinking at times like this? I do believe that humans are deep down kind and good, and I recommend the book Humankind for whenever you feel like you need to restore your faith in humanity when you're feeling too cynical. But this saccharine message of, if we just listen to each other and empathize, all the world's problems will be solved, just felt really hollow. By the end of the movie, I did not feel inspired. I felt tired and exhausted, having just spent a whole lot of time watching a movie where basically nothing really happened. It was kind of weird. My primary thought as I was leaving the movie theater was, well, that was a very appropriately named movie. It was really just the day of disclosure, nothing more and nothing less. And maybe that would have been enough if what comes next wasn't so much more interesting. It was kind of the only thing I was curious about by the end. We learned early on that the world is basically on the brink of World War III. And now that the whole world has learned about the existence of aliens, you'd think that that would have some serious ramifications on the relationship between countries, governments, and even just people. But nope. You don't get any of that. Instead, I realized that I waited the whole movie for the revelation to happen, another 20 minutes of everybody looking shocked, and then nothing. Are you kidding me? That would have been like the most interesting part, the consequences. And I guess that would have been a totally different story, something that couldn't be wrapped up in another 30 minutes, but for such a long runtime of like 2.5 hours, it just felt sort of insulting that there was pretty much no resolution. Just another setup for stuff that will happen off screen. I guess it was supposed to be a hopeful and open ending, but the only hope that I had at the end of the movie was that Margaret is gonna break up with her boyfriend. It's not like I want her to get together with Daniel, but that guy was just so not the man to be spending the rest of your life with, girl. Just leave him and go talk to some more birds. Okay, thoughts of birds calmed me down. I got a little bit too mad there. Mad right indeed. I would give the movie a 4 out of 10. It all just felt very perfunctory and nothing that was happening felt important up until the last 20 minutes, and then it was all just screens. I hope I was able to explain why, even if we don't go deep into the messages and the themes of the movie, it was just not a very good showing. If afterwards you still feel like you want to scratch that alien, empathy, human connection itch, I would highly recommend to just go watch Project Hail Mary. That one was such a better movie. And with that, I hope you all have a great week. Now I'm gonna go take a cat nap. Bye! Meow!